So, I want to preface this review by saying that overall, I thought that Ahsoka was a very good show. Looking at it holistically, I enjoyed most of it besides the last 2 episodes, and so for that reason, it does kind of sit around the upper echelons of Star Wars shows, at least in my view. However, the finale was not it, and I found it to be very rushed, full of ridiculous creative decisions that undermine some of the characters, especially Thrawn, and an almost anticlimactic conclusion. Now, that's not to say there weren't some good things about it, because there were, but overall I just found it to be a very disappointing, subpar conclusion to what has been a very good show. Now, there are going to be some spoilers ahead, so you have been warned. From the moment this episode starts, Thrawn makes a really stupid decision that is just so out of character. They make it abundantly clear at the very beginning of the episode that the job of transferring the cargo to the Chimera is done. And the only reason this whole episode plays out the way it does is because Thrawn makes the foolish decision to bring the Eye of Sion to the Chimera rather than taking the Chimera to the Eye of Sion. And this finale on multiple occasions just consistently makes Thrawn out to be an incompetent idiot, which is, in line with most officers of the Empire, but not Thrawn. The Great Mother Witches then give Morgan Elsbeth a makeover and a magical Night Sister sword, and the episode then jumps straight over to Ahsoka's Starfighter, and the quality of writing doesn't improve because it is just kind of bad. For some unknown reason, instead of piloting their Starfighter to the Chimera, as they're all now together, whilst knowing that they're in a bit of a rush and they need to get there fast, they're hovering the Starfighter above the turtle people and moving with them and going super slowly. Now, I get why they've done this, because they wanted to give the characters some time to interact, but the urgency of this situation, what they've set up over the past 3 episodes, does not afford them that time. And so this whole sequence is just stupid and doesn't work. Anyway, despite that, we have this moment where Ezra is inside building a new lightsaber with the parts that Hu Yang left behind, and I actually thought some of the dialogue here was pretty good. They are speaking about Kanan Jarrus and how he was as a young Jedi, and how that's comparable to Ezra, and in turn this then leads to a discussion about Sabine and Ahsoka's relationship. Ezra then builds the lightsaber, which looks very similar to Kanan's, but before he can show it to Sabine, she disappears, and is instead with Ahsoka on the hull of the ship outside, which again is basically not moving at any speed, by the way. We then have an important character moment between Ahsoka and Sabine, in which Ahsoka recognizes that even when everybody didn't believe in her, Anakin did, and so she needs to do the same for her own apprentice. And this is also important for Sabine in the sense that she finally feels like she has the belief and trust of her master. And overall, in terms of these 2 characters and this specific kind of interpersonal character arc, I actually think this was a good conclusion point, and I think that it was executed well enough for it to feel meaningful. But then straight away after this, more poor writing. Thrawn dispatches 2 TIE fighters to go and destroy the Jedi Starfighter. Now, bear in mind, they are in the open, moving at no speed, whilst being targeted by all of their enemies. And they don't even have the shields up. Again, it was an arbitrary moment which forces the plot to move forward and gives meaning to some of the later stupidity of the episode, rather than the plot moving forward in a way that's actually thought out. It's just really weak. So yeah, the ship doesn't have any shields whatsoever, and these TIE fighters fly in from a good distance, but our heroes don't react or move to it, and the TIE fighters come in and shoot the starship once and disable the engines. Ahsoka and Ezra then jump off and get underneath the ship, and they use the Force to stop it from crashing into the turtle people below. And meanwhile, the TIE fighters come in for another strafing run. However, Sabine manages to get the engines on just in time, and she then flies into them and destroys the TIE fighters. However, this damages the ship completely, and then it crashes. Ezra then makes the most ridiculously tone-deaf and mind-numbingly stupid statement I have ever heard, and he says, "Sorry to state the obvious, but this is going to slow us down," as if they weren't already moving at the slowest pace possible. It's like the writing here was trying to be in a serious tone, but it was almost totally unaware of the stupidity of the scenario. Now, of course, at this point when their ship is down, they realise, oh, we're actually in a rush, so they leave the ship behind with Hu Yang, and they jump on the Howlers and go full speed towards the Chimera. I don't get how a professional writer is so unaware to the absurdity in the consistency of this sequence. Anyway, they get to the Chimera, and Thrawn orders a turbo laser bombardment of the ground below the ship, as our heroes are trying to get to the Minas Tirith looking fortress thing that the Chimera is attached to. And of course, all of the turbo lasers miss, and they manage to get into the fortress without any harm whatsoever. And I'll tell you why this is out of character and completely stupid. Because Grand Admiral Thrawn is a genius, and all he had to do was raise the Chimera a few hundred feet above the spire on top of the fortress, and this would have negated any way of them getting into the ship. And to make this even tactically more logical, if the bombardment failed to kill them on the surface and the night troopers failed to stop them inside the fortress, he would have been in the position to bombard the fortress anyway without risking himself in any way, shape or form, and it would have been completely game over for the heroes. Literally, the only reason any of this happens is because Thrawn is written to be stupid because he has to make this story work, and this really frustrated me. It is almost the insincerity of the writing and the lack of creativity that has really brought about this whole situation, because they've almost written themselves into a corner where they need to write the character of Thrawn around this situation rather than write the situation around the character of Thrawn. And because of that, it totally stunts Thrawn's characterization and his ability to control these tactical situations, and to me it was just bad. Like I said earlier, he is written as a totally incompetent, typical Imperial officer who speaks like a poet, he speaks like he's Sun Tzu, but acts like a dude who plays Total War on easy mode. It is objectively bad characterization, and honestly, I hated it. Anyway, once they get into the fortress, they are stopped in their tracks by a bunch of night troopers, and so at the base of this temple, fortress, Minas Tirith thing, they get into this big fight, and I thought this sequence was fun to watch. They cut the stormtroopers down, but as they tried to move on, they get resurrected as zombies, and I thought this was entertaining as they all get up and they start languishing towards them slowly, firing the blasters lazily, moaning like zombies, and I thought this was actually a pretty fun way of portraying stormtrooper zombies. They then begin to run up the tower and they progressively block off the zombies by shutting down the doors, but this only slows them down temporarily. By this point, our super intelligent genius Grand Admiral, who is letting all of this happen because he's really, really clever, says that the Jedi are getting too close to the ship. What a surprise. And so he basically tells Morgan Elsbeth to go and commit suicide to stop them. The woman who is literally the reason he is about to escape. But whatever. I'm really glad they introduced this really interesting looking stormtrooper with a golden face mask called Enoch and have him do nothing in the whole show. Awesome. Thrawn then says, "Long live the Empire," and Morgan whispers, "Long live Dathomir," under her breath instead, and then she goes and confronts our heroes. Ahsoka then gets into a duel with Morgan while Ezra and Sabine go on ahead, and I thought this duel was pretty good. It was one of the better duels in the show. There was a lot more athleticism and dynamism in some of the movements, and I enjoyed it. But maybe they could have done a little bit more camera work and had a few more dynamic angles, but that is being really picky. While that duel is happening, Ezra and Sabine are attacked by two Death Troopers, who are revealed to be zombies. Now, I had a slight issue with Sabine in this moment because she is using her lightsaber to deflect blaster bolts pretty easily. This is not something that anybody can do, and I think it was rather evidently shown a few episodes prior that she is really bad at it, even in just a training sense. Then, all of a sudden, by the end of the show, in this high-pressure situation, she just blocks these blaster bolts like she's a fully trained Jedi, and I don't know, this was something I didn't really connect with too well. Yes, it could be suggested that she was training off-screen and improved, and I guess that would make sense. However, there hasn't really been enough time for her to do that, so yeah, it is what it is. As the fight then plays out, the Death Trooper manages to get to her and disarms her, and then he's kind of strangling her, but then of course, she has her Luke Skywalker on Hoth moment, which is kind of befitting to her character arc. After a little bit of struggle, she pulls the lightsaber to her and stabs the Death Trooper in the skull. And there was a really cool little shot here where the eyes glow green for a split second with the lightsaber going through. And it's nothing special, but the actual helmet of a Death Trooper has green eyes, and I just really liked how it accentuated that. As for Sabine using the Force, I don't have a problem with it personally. I know some people really don't like the idea of it, but for me, I enjoyed how they showcased her struggle of really opening herself up to the Force throughout the whole show, which was kind of alluded to in Star Wars Rebels too. And it was nice to see Sabine get that moment of clarity where she's finally able to commune with it, and I thought it showed good development of character and good progression of her story. However, what happens next takes this moment and just kind of throws it out of the window. So they defeat the two Death Troopers, and guess what happens? Thrawn raises the ship by a few hundred feet, and our characters realise, oh damn, we can't actually get into the ship anymore. Imagine if Thrawn had done that 10 minutes earlier. Anyway, as the ship is rising, Sabine basically says, hey Ezra, you need to jump, and I'll force push you up, and I immediately just shook my head. Ezra does just that, and Sabine uses the Force to force push him quite a distance, and he manages to reach the edge of the ship, climb in, and kill a bunch of stormtroopers. And like I said, I really dislike this moment because it takes away from the importance of that moment where Sabine uses the Force to grab her lightsaber, because it was a symbolic moment of Sabine's journey of growth, very similarly to how it was for Luke in Empire Strikes Back. To then make her do something extremely more difficult with the Force, no more than, 2 minutes later, makes that big moment of her using the Force finally to grab the lightsaber almost redundant to me. Imagine for a moment if Luke pulled the lightsaber out of the ice on Hoth, a significant character moment that showcases his improvement and his growth and his connection with the Force, which has the music and the build-up. He then cuts himself down, and then he uses the Force to pick up the Wampa, smack it around the ice cave against the walls, and then rips its arm off and escapes. That would be the same kind of thing. It just wouldn't work, because it makes that previous powerful moment feel totally pointless. And to me, that is pretty much exactly what happens here. Why give Sabine a significant character moment, especially in relation to her connection just using the Force, and then make her do something ridiculous with it a few seconds later? If she had done the lightsaber thing earlier in the show, and then progressively uses the Force a little bit more as the show goes on, and then have that moment when she pushes a grown man hundreds of feet into the sky, then I could buy it. And so to me, this whole sequence is just terrible. And it really irritated me, because I loved that assiduous moment of growth, showing Sabine's struggles and then overcoming it, and then just undermining that a few moments later is just, again, tone deaf and almost amateurish in a way. Anyway, Ahsoka makes her way to the summit of the fortress as she is swarmed over by the zombies from earlier, and instead of then jumping onto the Star Destroyer with the help of Ezra, Sabine lets him go and instead goes to support Ahsoka. I actually thought this was a very good moment. It was kind of symbolic of the idea that she was letting go of Ezra and her past in a way, and was instead going forwards towards her future, that being her master and her training. With the two of them then fighting side by side, they dispatch the Night Troopers on the summit, and then Ahsoka kills Morgan with the Night Sister blade after she manages to disarm her. And I thought this fight sequence was okay, but again, as I mentioned earlier, I just thought it was a lazy way of killing off Morgan, and the only reason this happens is because Thrawn is dumb. It's not sacrificial, it's not heroic in the eyes of the villain, it is just stupidity. And then Mr. Genius Thrawn decides to do the thing that he should have done from the very beginning, and that is destroys the fortress with the Chimera, which is now in orbit above the fortress where it always should have been. However, Hu Yang of course arrives to save the day after he fixes the Jedi starship. The three of them then try to chase the Chimera down, however Thrawn opens a comlink and praises Ahsoka for being a worthy opponent, but states that this is where she belongs because she is an outcast, a Ronin, when in actuality he should be criticising himself for being a complete moron. He then jettisons off into hyperspace and Sabine and Ahsoka are trapped in the other galaxy. As we then get to the back end of the episode, we have what is almost like an epilogue sequence in a way, with each group of characters that show their conclusions, which is why I also said it feels a little bit rushed. One shows Shin returning to the Raiders, and she looks all dejected and sad, and she raises her lightsaber above her head like it's a white flag or something. Then we get a sequence with Baylan, and again, so sad that Ray Stevenson didn't get to see the love that he has gotten for his character, and deservedly so. Even his last shot in the whole show without dialogue, for me, was probably one of the best things of this episode. He is standing on the hand of a statue carved into a mountain. That is the Father, and this hand is pointing towards some kind of temple in the far distance that is glowing, and next to it are statues of the Son and a destroyed statue of the Daughter. And even though Baylan's story was a little bit anticlimactic and they didn't do enough with him in this last episode, which is a shame, because I really wish there was more of Rey, I really do think they're kind of pushing towards some kind of Mortis storyline for Baylan, and if they're really brave, I do think they're going to do something with the mother, aka Abeloth. I really do think that the best way to honour Ray Stevenson is if they recasted him and they did continue that story. Because the way Ray spoke about the story at Star Wars Celebration was very poignant, and he spoke so passionately about his role as Baylan, and I think to not do anything more with it or to resolve it off screen would be a disservice to his memory. Then we have Thrawn's final scene of the show, in which he's flying over Dathomir, and I actually really did like this shot of the Eye of Sion sort of circling the planet like an eclipse, and then his cargo hold is shown with all of these metallic coffins. Very foreboding. And then the next sequence was, surprise, stupid. It switches over to the New Republic and Hera, and an Imperial ship just lands in the hangar, and all of these New Republic officers are standing there with their guns out, and a night trooper walks down the ramp. For some reason, Chopper gets all excited over this mysterious night trooper, and then he takes his helmet off and it's revealed to be Ezra. But to me, it's almost like they've written this in a way that treats its audience as if they're a little bit stupid. They almost just expect you to accept things that don't really make sense. How did Ezra get out of Thrawn's capital ship? Why would nobody be concerned about a stormtrooper taking an entire shuttle and just leaving the moment they got back to the known galaxy? Why would Thrawn not be concerned or notified about that? And if there is some big reason as to why he got off, why is that not something that was in the show? Also, to make this just that little bit more irritating, there's absolutely no reaction to the fact that he has just left his best friend behind in the same galaxy in which he has been abandoned for years. Even if it's just a 5-second shot of him looking down at them fighting with anguish or kind of sadness on his face would have done the trick, but no, they don't even think to put that in. And again, it literally showcases just how rushed this conclusion was, because they don't even want to show that reunion. It fades away before Hera and Ezra can even come together. But anyway, the final shot of the show has Ahsoka and Sabine in the Turtle Village, and Ahsoka sees Morai, the bird that is the embodiment of the daughter, and the two of them start talking about how they messed up and how Thrawn got back to the galaxy, but Ahsoka reassures Sabine that they also helped Ezra get home, and that the Force has guided them to where they needed to be. As they walk away back to the Turtle Village, Sabine stops for a moment and says she saw shadows in the starlight. And then it's revealed that looking over Ahsoka is the Force ghost of Anakin Skywalker. And again, I think this is actually indicative of some kind of Mortis-style storyline that they are leaning into. And with that, the show comes to an end. I thought holistically this was a very entertaining Star Wars show, but this finale was such a subpar conclusion. The writing was poor, a lot of the characterization was bad and it was rushed, which is a shame because overall I actually think the pacing of this show has been pretty good. But that's actually come as a detriment because what has been a relatively slow-paced show has resulted in a very poorly paced conclusion. I do think the splitting up of Baylan and Shin was a very bad decision in the last episode, and it's unsatisfying to leave them on cliffhangers without doing anything with them. But with that said, they have been the biggest highlight of the show, and it's just a little frustrating to see them get barely any screen time at the show's conclusion. Now, I do think the show did a really good job of setting up some interesting mysteries, establishing some possible story threads, and I will say with all of the cliffhangers, it's a little bit annoying the show hasn't been greenlit for season 2, because it feels like it's been purposefully made to be more than one season. But with that said, to me, it was a vast improvement over The Mandalorian season 3, Boba Fett, Obi-Wan, and while I don't think it was as good as Andor, it is really nice to have a Star Wars show that deals with the mysticism and the more fantastical elements of Star Wars that is also very good and deserves to be considered one of the best Star Wars shows, and I eagerly look forward to seeing where it goes next. If you made it this far and stuck with me throughout all of these reviews, thank you so much, it means the world to me, and if you did enjoy the review, then don't forget to hit the like button because it helps me out a great deal. And if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to join the biggest growing Knights of the Old Republic community on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.